I hope you liked our little countdown. Yeah, you can still do it, huh? It's a gene thing. One of our sisters could not do that, roll their tongue. But thank you for joining us. If you're tuning in, we do baby names live either 1 or 2 days after our podcast episode drops. Mallory and I are the co-hosts of the Baby Names podcast, and we are sisters too.
Oh.
Mallory just woke up. She can't take cues yet. But she's pretty.
Not bad for 5 minutes.
No, not bad. So this week's episode, we talked to Dr. Karen Panizzi, who is a linguistic anthropologist from the University of Western Ontario. And she has done studies with changing your name because of immigration purposes and assimilation. And it's a really great interview. If you have a chance, go back and listen if you haven't listened yet. And if you're joining us, drop a comment so we know you're here. And if anyone in your family has changed their name, either first or last, let us know the story because we want to hear it. Definitely in our family, we've had some name changes. And we kind of did a little teaser on the episode about our surname. Our first two sisters were born. Mal, you want to take this up with the name?
Moose. Moos. No E. Just Moos. According to our grandmother, she said that it was originally pronounced Mose.
Right. In Germany, Moses. It would be Mose.
For Moses.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yes.
But here in the U.S., just people see Moos and pronounce it like the animal. Not a bad animal. It's a very mighty, strong animal. But I think Dad he just didn't like growing up with the name. I'm not sure what Uncle Chuck's experience with it was. I know Dad was a little chunky in high school, and so he might have gotten teased because of it and be called Moose. But I think after he had our two older sisters, he wanted to change the name, and he just didn't like the stigma of being Moose anymore. And it was after his dad had died, so he didn't really have any family ties to name it. And his mom remarried, and so her last name wasn't Moose anymore. And I really don't know the story. I guess we could ask Uncle Chuck, but he and Chuck, his brother, both decided to change their surname to Moss and just change one little letter. So that's not our original surname, although me and Mallory were both born with Moss on our birth certificates. Thank the Lord. We dodged that bullet. I don't think I would have liked to have been called Moose either. I think, and there are people out there with the surname. I don't know of any of our relatives. I know family tree members, but I don't know if there's any living relatives that have the original surname. Do you?
No, I don't, actually. And I just want to point out that if I was Mallory Moose, then I would sound like a cartoon character. Hello, guys! It's time for the Mallory Mouse Show!
Mallory Mouse Show. Now, we also had another surname change that we were not aware of until I started doing the family tree a couple of years before you started. And that was, we thought that our grandmother's maiden name was Bond, B-O-N-D, like James. And everyone in our family assumed that was her maiden name. But when I went back into the records, I noticed that a lot of the signatures looked like Band, B-A-N-D. And I was curious and went further and further and found out that was truly her family's surname was B-A-N-D, which in Germany is pronounced Bond.
Right, Bond.
Bunt. So probably that got mishmashed when her ancestors came over and said their name was Bont, and the somehow it was transcribed as Bond, which is actually an English surname, Bond, just like James, but it is not ours. So if you go back to the old land, our surnames have changed, and that's something you should look at when you're doing your own family tree research. Is, it might not be the same spelling. And something that Karen, Dr. Panizzi, pointed out is that a lot of times when immigrants came to the U.S., they weren't necessarily literate. So they had never spelled their last name. They had never written it. It was not necessary. So they didn't know how to spell it. So they just took any spelling that the officer gave them, and that was that. So it might not even have been a matter of assimilation. But just that they had never written it before. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In terms of first names, some things that we discovered is our great grandpa Iggy, they called him Ignatius here in the US, but his Ignatz, I think, was a nickname. But Ignatz was on the immigration papers on the ship manifest. So it took me a while. I don't know if you saw those too, but to find Ignatz and not Ignatius or Iggy when I was looking for that, for his manifest to come over. And then Catherine Lulling, who was our great grandmother on our mother's side, was Katarina. And she came from Luxembourg, and in the US was known as Catherine. And so that was an assimilation of using the same name, but just the anglicized version of the name. And then we mentioned that in kind of our contemporary family, my Aunt Fern, who was married to our uncle, was Fern Moss, and that was a very planty, leafy name. And so when I think I was about 8 or 10, I don't even remember, but I was young, she changed her name to Jennifer. But she changed her name many times. So she was originally Fern Markowitz. That was her birth name. Then she was Fern Moss. Then she was Jennifer Moss. Then
You forgot Marks from Markowitz.
No, that's later. Then she was Jennifer Markowitz because she went back to her maiden name, and then she shortened it to Jennifer Marks. Okay. So that's 5 names, 4 name changes for Fern to Jennifer.
Well, I had 5 name changes.
No, you didn't. Well, maybe you did. Were they all legal now?
Yeah, of course. I'm not like Super Mal Wonderwind or something like that.
So through your marriages and divorces,
right,
you've had different names too.
Yes.
That happens as well. There was something that we didn't address, is that changing the name of your child too. And we talked about that on specific shows when we've gotten user questions about that. Like, how old can a kid be when I can change their name? And we had one user write in who had a child who was 6 years old, and we were like,
yeah.
Because, I mean, you can talk about that psychologically. That's not good for their identity. In a way, I think the parent is like negating a part of them in a way. Right. Don't you think?
I do. And I think the only way that works for me is if the child is asked for it.
Right.
And not like Marilyn Jaja, but I mean, asked for it.
I mean, yeah, you have to take into account if they're 4 and asking for a name change.
Yeah, it's going to be Teletubby, Wonder Woman.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you can call them Teletubby Wonder Woman, and you can honor their request. I just wouldn't go through the legal name change at that point.
Right. And I think my point is maybe there's a Richard, and Richard is 8 or 10, and Richard is teased mercilessly and asks for a name change, and maybe everyone calls him Rich or some other version of Richard, and that's what he wants his name to be.
Yeah. So Miranda asked, is there a legal rule of how many times you can change your name? I don't think so. There are rules about changing your name, and I wanted to show you where on the site that you can find that. So I'm going to, for the first time, do a screen share and see if this works and walk you through where to find this. Okay. So here we are on babynames.com.
Woohoo!
And if you go to name advice and name change laws, our sister Sue did a wonderful job. This is in the US. It all depends what state you live in. So name changes and naming depend on the state themselves. So if you kind of scroll through, you'll see that we have almost every state and some links on how to change your name and what the rules are. But I'm not sure that there is a rule or law in particular on how many times. It's basically like making sure that you don't do it for nefarious purposes, that you're not trying to evade the law for any reason.
Exactly.
Allie said she'd be curious on how many people choose new names and what strategies people look at with their name changes. She personally changed her name, and she chose a name that was somewhat similar to ease her transition, but it wasn't LGBTQ, but in regards to starting a new life after an abusive situation. So yeah, there's so many reasons a person might want to change their name. And in part 2 of our name changing episode, we're going to talk about gender transition and how a person who's going through a transition might go about the process of changing their name, because it's a really huge part of their identity and part of the process. So we didn't want to ignore that as well. But yeah, and what I did was I started a survey on our website under babynames.com surveys about transgender naming and choosing the new name. So I might expand that to another survey on just changing names in particular, not necessarily for LGBTQ, but for anyone who's changed their name, because it would be interesting to have that data. Allie, you're right. You know, so back to changing your kid's name. I think up until maybe they're 1, it's okay. But the ideal would be within the first 3 months. Like, yes, parents do have some kind of name remorse. It's happened, you know, they don't feel like it fit, or maybe they were forced into the name by family and they just weren't happy with it. Go ahead and change it. But as soon as the baby starts hearing their own name and tying it to themselves, you're creating their identity. And again, to reject that is going to send a message to your child.
So I would just like to ask Leah Michelle to consider changing the name of her baby Everreich or Everrich to perhaps something other than
Everly
Ever.
would even be better. Well, it's a boy,
No.
right? Okay. So Evan, you know, so let's talk about the celebrity baby names currently, because there are some doozies. The first one, you're right. We did find out that Reich in the case of Leah Michelle's husband is pronounced Rich. However, it's spelled Reich, which is Reich in German. And Everreich has a lot of connotations, you know, specifically for anyone of Jewish descent, but even for anyone, like you said on the podcast, Mal. And yeah, I think that's going to be a problem. Don't you?
I think they're going to change it.
You think so?
Yes.
They probably just didn't realize.
Right. How they could not realize Everrich is a little dumb too.
Yeah, Everrich is a little expectation-y too.
Well, it's like, you know what it reminds me of is that when you turn onto the street of a local casino, they named the street Richmond. So rich man.
Yeah.
That's what Ever Rich reminds me of.
Ours is Lucky Lane. The interesting thing is Leah Michelle dropped her surname for her stage name, and it could have been just to simplify. It was Sarfati, Sarfati. Who knows? I don't know why she dropped it. It probably just to simplify Leah Michelle. But the fact that she did that and dropped her own surname and yet didn't take into account the Reich surname or Rich is really interesting to me. But Leah, if you're out there, you still have time. You still have time.
Yes.
Change that baby's name.
Yes.
The other thing that came up is we had Buddy Dessert.
Buddy Dessert
was Brie Bella and Daniel Bryan, whose real name is Brian Lloyd Danielson. So he kind of flipped it. They named their child Buddy Dessert, and it came out in People magazine why they chose these names. And it's actually pronounced desert, which it spelled dessert, but pronounced desert. And it was, I think, Brie's grandma's maiden name. So Buddy was after Daniel's father, whose actual name was Donald. I looked it up. So he must have gone by Buddy. And you know me in nicknames, but Dessert or Desert is the middle name after her grandma's maiden name. What do you think about that?
Oh, I hate it. I mean, first of all, everyone pronounced dessert.
They will pronounce it dessert.
And second of all, it's just a ridiculously dumb middle name. I'm sorry.
But at least it's the middle name. It's not Dessert Buddy.
Desert Buddy. I know. And I'm glad it's not Dessert Buddy. But the problem is what if this kid is chubby?
Oh, and their name is Dessert.
Yeah. I just think it's not. I mean, name the baby Desiree, Deseret, if you want to.
Like Beyonce was named after her mother's maiden name, which was Beyonce.
Right.
Beyince. So they changed it a little.
Yeah, exactly. You can do that.
And we also had Katy Perry and Orlando Bloom.
Daisy!
We had a little girl named Daisy Dove. Cute as all heck, I have to admit. And you know me, I don't like pun names. Daisy Bloom. And to me, it sounds like a brand name. It sounds like a line of cosmetics or children's clothing or something. But I can't help liking it. I mean, it's just so Katy Perry, if you think about it.
I think Daisy Bloom is an awesome name. And if I remember correctly, sometime in the last month, I recommended Daisy, and maybe they were listening to the podcast.
Maybe they were. That's a possibility. And then just, I think yesterday, we have to do a jump on this. Ed Sheeran had a baby girl, and her name is Lyra, Lyra, Antarctica Seaborn Sheeran. Now, Seaborn is his wife's last name. Lyra Antarctica, again, with that middle name, right? And fans speculate that Lyra, or Lyra, I assume it's Lyra, is the name of the main character in Sir Philip Pullman's popular fantasy trilogy, His Dark Materials. And Ed has come out saying he was a huge fan of the series and saying it was the greatest love story ever told. So that's a possibility.
Yeah,
and,
strong possibility. I like Lyra.
I like Lyra too. Lyra Sheeran. I don't know about that though. Lyra Sheeran. I guess
it also reminds me of Lyric.
Yeah, I like Lyric too. Now, Antarctica It's unclear whether that came from his Dark Materials. The fans say much of the first book in the trilogy, Northern Lights, is set in the Arctic. Now, the Arctic is different than the Antarctic. I hope everyone knows this. Has had their geography class. But I think what is most probable is that 9 months before the baby was born, Ed and Cherry, they visited Antarctica.
And about 9 months before?
Uh-huh. So I think that the most probable explanation is that is where Lyra was conceived. What do you think?
I think you're probably right, but I still would have gone with like Erica.
And not Antarctica.
And not Antarctica. Or Arctica. Arctic. Archaea. I mean, there are enough variations of that name or potential variations that you can go with it. Not necessarily broadcast, hey, I was conceived in Antarctica.
Don't they have like city names in Antarctica? Why does it have to be the continent?
I know.
I have a friend whose daughter, Acadia, Acadia. I really like that name. They call her Katie.
Pretty.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I wonder what the town they were staying in was. Now, I've always wanted to go stay in the Ice Hotel. There's one in, I think the Netherlands or Sweden or something, but there's also one in Montreal. That's on my bucket list, the Ice Hotel. Not in Antarctica. I don't know. It just seems so cool. Like the whole bar is made out of ice. Oh, the igloos are made of ice that you stay in, and then they give you a whole bunch of like blankies. But even the beds are made out of ice. Everything's made out of ice. I just think it'd be so cool.
Do you think people have? Do you think people have sex in those hotels?
I'm sure. Name their baby Antarctica. So that's kind of cool. So going back to Everreich, I asked some of my friends, I just wanted to bounce it off people because I'm like, am I overreacting about this or not? My friend Maddie said, unfortunately, you can't separate the surname from the word. It's there permanently and shouldn't be ignored. Just as Adolf was once a common name, it has been sullied forever, and a swastika means well-being and considered a symbol of luck and fortune for Hindus and Buddhists long before Hitler stole it. But we can't use it anymore, obviously, and not sure why anyone would burden their child like this. And I think that's just putting it perfectly, really. There's connotations, there's a burden. And my friend Billy, who's a jokester, said, at least it wasn't Everreich the Third. So, so Leah, call us. We'll help you. We'll help you change that name. So we talked about dessert and why they did that. And yeah, so that's kind of what we wanted to talk about. Do you have any stories? Allie, you told us your story, but if you have any stories about your family and their name changes, post it on our Facebook page. We'd love to talk about it in our next episode. If you have questions for us, you can always write us at podcast@bebenends.com or call our message line 702-848-5510. Yeah, that's it. 702-848-5510. Or you can do like one of our fans did and she recorded the question on her voice recorder on her phone and just sent us the file. So just let us know if we can use it on the show. And again, we said 2 weeks is going to be the second part of our name changing episode. We're going to talk to Dr. Olivia Danforth, who's a medical doctor, has gone through the transition, male to female. And we're going to talk to our own Keese Wiederspan, who's going to talk about going through the transition for non-gender binary transgender persons and how she found her own name. And I didn't know this, but I had a little part in it. I just had forgotten. So that'll be a great episode, and I want you to join us for that. After that, we're going to talk about dictionary names, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Why did you put the dictionary so far away from you when you were prepping for the class?
No, I didn't know I was going to grab it. All my name books are over in the corner there. So, we can just choose a name, and this one is Hoodwink. Don't name your child Hoodwink.
But you know now who's going to name their child Hoodwink, and that is Penn Jillette. No, Penn Jillette. Going to be Hoodwink Moxie Crime Fighter the second.
I think he might be our age and a little over the
does that mean anything when it comes to men?
Well, that's true. And plus, I had a friend who's my age who had twins last year. So she had twins at 56, and they're doing very well. They're thriving. So whoever wants to have babies whenever they want to have babies, just do what you want. And on that note, all right. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you in 2 weeks. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Let us know if there's anything else you want us to do episodes about, because we listen to you.
We do.
Our listeners, we listen to you too.
And we love you.
We love feedback. Yes, we do.
Oh, what am I doing? That is 6 in Chinese.
Hang loose.
It's 6 in Chinese. But we love you.
Did you want to talk about your teaching your kids? Talking about changing names? Because they choose American names too, right?
They do. Now, it's not always up to the children. Sometimes it's up to the parents. The couple times that I've asked, it's always been.
Do they have to choose English names?
No, I have several children who just list their Chinese name as their name.
It's probably fun for them, though, since they're learning English.
Well, I think that when it's done by the children, unfortunately, we have some situations like Moxie Crime Fighter where the children are just being funny. So you have names like Wi-Fi, Google, iPhone.
That's awesome. I mean, I remember choosing a Spanish name for Spanish class, Yeah. I was Inocencia, because there was no such thing as Jennifer in Spanish.
And I think that there have been some great names that are beautiful. But when I see fairy, or when I see 3,000 Elsas, I'm thinking that the children have something to do with naming themselves.
Probably. Okay, guys, that's it. We'll talk to you later. Tune in next time. We'll see you then. Bye.
See ya.